Hey everyone, John with BleepinJeep. This time we're talking about the electrical system and the wiring that I did on the TDI swap. So there's a lot to go over here. I did a number of different things with stock wiring harness on the Jeep. I have a custom wiring harness from Fast Forward Automotive that is what connects to all of the Volkswagen components and the Volkswagen ECU. I did keep the Volkswagen ECU. I didn't make it a mechanical TDI, and also kept the Jeep ECU, which is what allows me to run all of the CAN bus gauges that are in the factory cluster. So stick around, we'll dive into all those aspects. Of course, if you're not already a subscriber, now would be a great time to subscribe, as well as hit the bell so that you get notified about new upcoming episodes and premieres. We do a lot of premieres now, so you don't want to miss any of those. Hit that bell, it'll notify you that we've got something coming up. Also, we do have a Patreon, which is getting real exciting. We've got some cool stuff going on with Patreon that happens before it does for the general public, and it's a great way to support everything that we do here on BleepinJeep as well. So check that out if you can, and let's get into it here. I've got the Fast Forward wiring harness, which connects from my ECU to my engine to the throttle pedal. Eventually I'm going to do cruise control inside. I've also got Mean Lemons, 2-gauge battery cables, alternator cable and everything that I'm installing. So there's a lot going on with electrical for this swap, and it's all really pretty easy. It's just a matter of routing it to where it needs to go. The Fast Forward harness comes with all the Volkswagen plugs connected to it, so that's super helpful. This one in particular goes to the turbo actuator, and the Jeep harness, I've kind of tied this all in together with the Jeep harness. It's sort of an extra step you wouldn't necessarily have to do, but I found it to be a little bit cleaner to do that, and I also weeded out some of the Jeep, the unneeded Jeep connections from that as well. And I'm working on the ECU mount for this. So with the TDI setup here, I need a Jeep ECU and a Volkswagen ECU. Volkswagen ECU is required, of course, to run the engine, all the engine electronics, and the Jeep ECU is strictly required so that I can run my dashboard. The dash in the 97 to 2001 Jeep Cherokees is run by CAN bus, so the gauges and everything are talking through this ECU. With the sensors in the engine, along those same lines, I am running a oil pressure sender down in here for the Jeep, and we don't really care about the Volkswagen one. The Volkswagen ECU does not care about the signal from oil pressure. Just because I need a better place to put things, it's easier, closer to mount than making a bracket that comes all the way down here. My airbox might end up over in here, and I'm just going to piggyback these two ECUs on each other. ECU was mounted this side towards the fender, so flipped and onto the fender. So I just flipped it back this way, and now I'm going to use the Volkswagen ECU bracket to mount them both. I am going to cut this here. That's going to be unnecessary. I'm going to bend these brackets, and so that I can use the kind of factory holes in this bracket to mount onto the inner fender here. On this, I will weld another piece of metal, which will tie into the stock mounting holes for the Jeep ECU. Right, so this piece has been hacked. That was there, gone. And then we gotta bend these. And I'm just bending these in my vise. This is really thin sheet metal, so this is bending really easily. And I can do the rest with a hammer or whatever. Try this out. Now that those are bent, you can see it has a long side and a short side. The long side, of course, being the left there. And I'm gonna need to bend that one. So it's kind of roughly at a 90 right now. I need to be kind of more of a 45. Pretty happy with that. So this one ended up really just being straightened here. That was pointed the other way. So straightened out and then bent here. The bend there was, again, kind of straightened. It was sticking too flat for what I needed. And then this side was bent about here. So I flattened that, bent it again there. And again, this one was bent the same direction as the other side. This little tab here was just something for the this whole bracket to like sit on. It was just sort of a foot. It could have been cut off, but I just bent that flat as well. And that's where it's gonna sit. Volkswagen ECU just kind of slots in there. Diving into one of the most dreaded areas of this swap for me, and that is the wiring, the Jeep harness specifically. So I have found here online, pretty sketchy setup, ton of Google searching, came across jeep-manual.ru. So we get this huge PDF, and from this we can find what we're looking for. So let's see, I bookmarked some of these things. Yay, there's the PCM wiring. And I highlighted some things in the document, printed it out, just the pages that I needed. Things, of course, like fuel injectors, I'm not going to need. So what's cool is these are also side by side with the diesel control module wiring. So that gives some kind of insight into what things were needed for a diesel in the Cherokee. Of course, it's a totally different engine, but it's way simpler. Like if you look at the diesel versus the gas for some of these pinouts, it's like 4 things for diesel and 12 things for gas. So it gives you an idea of what things that you definitely do need just by looking at that. PCM C1, which is the black plug. From that, I think I'm going to want my fuse ignition switch, a sensor ground probably. I don't want to delete any grounds, might as well keep all the grounds. Crankshaft position sensor signal. It's all telling you too what colors the wires are. Your primary color, then your tracer color or the stripe on the wire. So once you have the wire clipped on your PCM plug, to remove it, what you want to do is push on that with a screwdriver. You hear it click. Comes up back here, find your wire that you want to remove, and just keep your fingers holding the black top part of the plug in there, and just pull on that wire, and you remove the pin. Straight out the back. When you're done, see how the blue is sticking out the end there? Just push that back the other way. And now your pins are all locked in there again. And when you're all done, it's a nice simplified plug. And out of 32 possible pins on this thing, we are only using 4. And honestly, probably don't even need this green wire, so 3 wires. So don't be an idiot like me and cut wires that you need. You've got a twisted pair, and I believe this goes for most Jeeps, most of the CAN bus Jeeps out there. You've got a twisted pair of wires, purple and white on mine, violet and black, and white and black is the designation. That's for your airbag module. Probably you want to keep airbags. It's a good idea. And your computer needs them. So it's going to throw that no bus code, and no gauges will work if you don't have your airbags. So hook those wires back up, and boom, got gauges. But this is all the wires I didn't need. Kind of crazy. I pulled all of these pins from the ECU connectors here. And yeah, so I've got them bundled in 3 groups here from the 3 different plugs, and I'm not gonna need any of these. They're for things like evap, oxygen sensors, fuel injectors, let's see what else, cruise control system from the original Jeep, idle air control, idle air temperature, a couple of them go to the TCU, things like that. So I'm gonna hang on to these because I'm sentimental like that, but otherwise, once things are up and running and good, I'm gonna cost them. So yeah, that's all the wiring you don't need. All right, I've got the Jeep engine wiring harness laid out. This is what's going to connect to the things on the Volkswagen engine that are going to feed some of the gauges. So this had a whole lot more things on it, and I've whittled it down. Got the Jeep ECU plugs, oil pressure sensor, crank position sensor. I did screw up. There's on this plug here are the wires for the cam position sensor. That's going to be something I want for the tach, I believe. So those wires are going to need to connect to something eventually. Figure that out. So crank position sensor, that plugs into the crank position sensor that's on the bell housing and connects or reads the rotation of the flywheel. This guy, I'm not quite sure, probably can get deleted. Coolant temperature, that's going in my hard pipe for the coolant. Body connection, so this ties into the big thick wire that runs along the firewall. Grounds, so those just need to be grounded somewhere good. And then that wire goes to my plugs for speedometer and reverse lights. Next up, I'm going to be test installing this part of the harness. This is the original Jeep engine harness. Probably some of these things are going to need to be shortened up, and so I'll do that by kind of wrapping up the wire and then taping it nicely. Sometimes when routing these kind of wires, it is necessary to undo the connector so that you can pass this through your firewall or fit it into some sort of boot. So I've made a note of all of these, but I also have a wiring diagram from Fast Forward. I'm kind of prying these in like a twisting, prying motion. For removing the pins from the plug, there's like a plastic tab that you have to pry down on. There's a little groove in here. Pry down on that. Feel it kind of pull away, and then pull out your pin. The pins removed from that plug, I've got them all bunched up in this electrical tape, and I decided rather than try to push this wire all the way through, I'm gonna just fish it through using this tube, which is going to run my boost gauge. So I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this so that it'll help slide through the slit that I made in the boot. This is the boot that's below the clutch master cylinder. So the wire's all fished and the plug is put back together. So what I need to do now is to replace my OBD2 port from the Jeep, the one that reads the Volkswagen ECU. And really I'm just going to pull this one off and tuck it up in here, zip tie it somewhere, so it's still somewhat accessible if I ever need it. That swap's complete, so find some slack on this wire if I can, and I'll just tuck it up. So you can see I brought the accelerator pedal wire in. That's this here. And I also brought in the glow plug relays, mounted those where the automatic transmission controller was.
You would not necessarily need to remove the automatic transmission controller. You could leave it in place and just disconnect it, but I don't see any need to have it. I decided to pull it out of here, cut the wires for it. I routed the fuses, or the relays and fuses, through that same boot in the Firewall and screwed it in. Actually used one of the same mounting holes as the transmission controller had, and there was another hole that I put a 1/4-20 bolt and then the factory screw. That is a switched power, so a 12-volt switched, but it is constant while cranking. So that's important because this also is feeding the ECU. It's 12 volts, which tells it to turn on. So if that went off while I was cranking, so with the ECU, and the engine would never start. So that's just triggering my relay and telling my ECU to turn on.
This part of the harness that I'm running right now connects to the injection pump, the needle lift sensor on the injector, number 3 injector, a oil pressure sensor, and coolant temperature sensor. So figuring out the best way to route this, maybe that's kind of the whole battle with this wiring thing. There's not any head scratching as far as what goes where, but it's how to get it there. So that's what I'm working through here. I have this little jumper plug. This plugs in the alternator. This plugs into the fast forward harness. And this wire is about tripled up inside of here. It was super extra long. While I'm on the task of wiring and electrical, I'm going to go ahead and take care of this lovely little contraption, which is the turbo controller, or N75. If you're a Volkswagen person, you know it by that name most likely. There's 2 of these. The good news is I really only need one. The other one is for the EGR, which is deleted, and I had that capped off while it was in the Volkswagen still. So I'm going to go ahead and figure out the vacuum routing to simplify that and mount this little guy somewhere on either my Firewall or fender, probably on this side, turbo's on that side. I do like how these are rubber kind of shock mounted through here, so I'm gonna want to try to keep that. Got my bracket finished up here. I rounded the end there on the bench grinder and hit this with some steel paint. I put the bushings and grommet back in. We've got the N75 here kind of stripped down, so there's no vacuum hoses on it. This one's going to go to the airbox, and this one goes to the turbo, and then this one goes to the vacuum reservoir or vacuum ball. Well, I thought I had the perfect location to put the N75. I was going to put it back in the corner of the engine bay there, but the wire won't reach that far, so that's not a big deal. Just won't go that far over. So I'm going to actually mount it kind of in a little bit of a protected spot down here. You can't see right now, but below the air conditioning and heater controls. And to do that, I need to cut a little bit more from it. Right onto that bolt. Sitting up behind here. And now I'll zip that nut back on there, and that'll be its home. Check engine light fixed. I did a little research last night because I couldn't even get the key to click, and immediately I knew I did something stupid. I didn't do anything with the neutral safety switch wiring. So normally, this being an automatic, it would only allow the solenoid for the starter to get power if it was in park or neutral. Obviously, this thing, has no automatic transmission anymore. It has no neutral safety switch module anymore. So that circuit's open and it needs to be grounded. Coming from the power distribution center is a black wire with a white tracer on it, and I had it just taped off. So we're gonna plug that to, it's supposed to go to ground, so that that's not always open. And if you wanted it to be an actual neutral safety mechanism, I could either wire that to a switch that's going to ground it when I press the clutch pedal, or I can just put a momentary spring-loaded switch on it. So give that a try right now. I'm just going to put it to ground and see if it does allow me to click the starter. Fingers crossed. Hope this works. Don't let me down, internet. Oh, baby. Thank you, internet, for not letting me down. One thing, if you're switching from automatic to manual, you're going to need to think about the reverse lights. And I kind of got lost over that, and being perfectly honest, was not really all that concerned about it at the time. But you're definitely going to need reverse lights. So the easiest place to get that is going to be from the neutral safety switch wiring. If you can grab that wire out of there and mark it and tap into it later, that's going to be your easiest bet. But on this 01, the reverse light wire is brown with light green, and it is in the bundle of wires that goes in kind of underneath the brake booster area down in here. So I was able to find it in that bundle, clip it, test it. Reverse lights come on, so that's perfectly good. The AX15 has a reverse light switch on it. So basically I need to take 12 volt, run it to the transmission wiring, and then the other side of that, the open side of that, is going to go to this wire here. One of the wires that you definitely want to keep from your stock Jeep PCM is this. On mine it's blue with a light pink tracer in it, and this wire is what the Jeep PCM uses to control the stock Jeep fan control. So a little 12 volts to this, low amperage, triggers the relay in the power distribution center and kicks the fan on. One of the most frequent wiring questions that I get is, how did I get the tachometer to work in this Jeep? The tachometer for the CAN bus system requires both the cam signal and the crank position sensor signal. You don't need to fake the cam signal entirely, you just need the actual crank signal from your crank position sensor, which is at the flywheel. The computer just needs a momentary blip from the cam signal, so you can fake that by actually taking the cam signal wire and touching it to signal ground. What I chose to do, I tried a number of different methods. I would love to find something that automatically happens when you start the Jeep. I haven't found anything that's reliable for doing that yet, so I've rigged up this push button momentary switch on the side of the ignition here. It works the best right when you start the Jeep. Tachometer then is accurate and works as it should, of course, until you restart the engine. This does seem to vary a little bit between years. So, for example, I talked to a guy that owns a 1999 model, which had the distributor still, not the distributorless ignition, and that model, he seemed to be able to just constantly connect those wires and it would work. For me, if I constantly connect those wires, I get a check gauges light and everything quits. So this is what's worked the most reliably for me. It's a little annoying, but it is what works for now. This is the Power Distribution Center, or PDC. Normally you just have this lug for connecting from your battery. I added this copper lug
and I had to grind down. This is just like a T-bolt that you would use for a battery terminal. Just had to grind it down to fit into this plastic clip on the PDC. But that slid in there nice and tight now, and Mean Lemons provides a 150 amp mega fuse, so that can come across these two terminals now. Clips in there, and then I can connect my positive battery terminal, which goes to the battery on that side, and then the other side will go to the alternator. So that runs around to my alternator, so it's going to feed power in across the fuse in case it was overcharging. Fuse would blow, and the likewise, the feed off of the battery for starting. So now we just need this connected to the battery terminal, and the starter wire as well connected to the battery terminal. So those two connections, and this one's kind of cleaned up by running the alternator line across that fuse there. And it's nice and protected with a little cap that goes over that.
Well, that's it for this time. Hopefully the wiring aspect is a little bit less daunting for you now that we've gone over a lot of the different things that I did and that went into the wiring harnesses and the computers. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, it's at BleepinJeepJohn over there, and you can check out a little bit more in real time what I'm doing with the XJ and some of the adventures that I've taken it on. I'll catch you next time.